Hello and welcome. Today we will be making Memphis Dry Rub Ribs. We are going to use a quarter cup, tablespoon, and a teaspoon. I like to use Ziploc bags, and these are the seasonings that we're going to use. Brown sugar, white sugar, salt, paprika, chili powder. You can use whichever one you're going to use. I prefer chipotle. Granulated garlic, granulated onion, pepper, celery salt, and ground mustard. Now when I mix these seasonings, I like to use sandwich bags. It just makes it easier to separate them into smaller portions, and I can save whatever I don't use, and it's easier to mix them up just by shaking them. Since I have about 6 racks of ribs, I will be making about 5 bags, which should be more than enough. So I just go ahead and open up the bags, place them on my aluminum covered tray. Now I'm going to use 1/4 cup of paprika as my base. I fill up my 1/4 cup measuring cup, and then I put it into each bag. Now I'm going to use 1 tablespoon of dark brown sugar packed. Now if your brown sugar happens to be a little too tough, you can always break off a big chunk of it, put it in a bowl. As you can see, my brown sugar right here is pretty packed and doesn't let me scrape it. So I'm going to stick it into a bowl, microwave it for about a minute, and it just becomes soft as velvet. Now I can work with it, which is what I want for the recipe to work. So using a tablespoon, I just smash it up a little bit more, which breaks it up a lot more and it's easier to work with at this point. Now I'm going to use 1 tablespoon and put it into each bag. Next up is 1 tablespoon of white sugar, and we're going to put 1 tablespoon per each bag. Now we're going to use 1 teaspoon of just regular salt or sea salt, whichever you have in stock. We put 1 teaspoon per bag. Next up, we use 1 teaspoon of celery salt. Next season up, it's going to be 1 teaspoon of granulated onion. Then we do 1 teaspoon of granulated garlic, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, next up 1 teaspoon of ground mustard, and we use 1 teaspoon of chipotle chili powder. You can use California, regular chili powder. I like the chipotle because it gives it a nice smoky flavor and enhances the seasonings while smoking outside on the smoker. It really lends itself for flavor. So once you have all of your seasonings into your bag, you're just going to close it up, shake it up, mix it up, and make sure that you get to see all the sugar, all the spices get all grounded up, mixed up. And you just do it for each bag and separate them. You only use what you use. Once you are done mixing all your seasonings, just put them to the side for now. And now I am going to clean up a little bit. Since I covered up my tray with foil, I'm just going to, just pop off the aluminum foil and throw it out. Now that I have my area already clean, I make sure I put on some gloves for safety, for food safety, number 1 rule here. And we make sure that the meat is taken out 1 hour before cook time. Because you want the meat at almost at room temperature, not so much cold because it'll take a lot longer to cook outside. But what I'd like to do here is I like to use aluminum foil and cover up a baking sheet. The purpose for this is after I powder my ribs, I have a place to stack them, and I use this tray to take them outside to the smoker, which is in the next step. It's always good to have big rolls of aluminum foil when you're doing barbecue or any type of cooking, because you're always going to end up using a lot of it in the long run. Once the sheet is covered, I put it to the side. Now I'm going to cover up my little tabletop here. I like to put multiple sheets onto the countertop just in case if the rib bone were to, scratch up the aluminum foil. I really don't want to have to be cleaning up so much afterwards. So if I double up and put up a lot of aluminum foil, it just makes it easier in the cleanup. So I already have my area set up for what I'm going to do. Time to unwrap the ribs. The cut of ribs I like to use are the spare ribs. These I got at my local butcher. It's always great to have your local butcher on call for these type of projects. They always sell prime cut for anything, and I have yet to have any bad cuts from my local butcher. So we make sure we pull off the membrane that's underneath the rib, but my butcher already took that off, but I'm just making sure I'm taking off some excess little fat here and there. I just inspect the rib, make sure everything is fine. Nothing looks out of place. Lay it flat on top of the countertop. And I just grab the first bag of seasoning. Open it up. And just shake it over it. Just kind of powder coat it. Since the seasoning has sugar and salt, you don't worry about over seasoning, because the sugar will balance out the salt. Now, if it was a heavy salt recipe, I would really say go easy on it, but with this type of recipe, you don't have to worry about over seasoning it. I make sure that the top and bottom are covered. There may be a few clumps here and there of sugar, which you can kind of just work it into the meat. I make sure that all sides are covered, top, bottom, and I make sure I sprinkle on and tap on the sides. As you're going to be powder coating a lot more ribs, you're going to accumulate more seasoning, which you can just reuse on top of more ribs. So it becomes more efficient as you make more ribs. Okay, and this is what it looks like when it's all powdered evenly on both sides. We just put it to the tray off to the side right there, and we pull out the next one. Since I have to do multiples, I'm going to speed up the video here just to show me seasoning all the rest of them, which I think was 5 more after this. Okay, now that the ribs are seasoned, I take them outside. I take a little bit of the cooking spray here and coat my rib racks. These are the racks I'm going to use within my smoker to place the ribs on them. I had started the fire before I started seasoning my ribs, just to be more efficient. So I laid the first rack down, and now I start placing the ribs within the rack. Since my smoker has 2 racks, now I'm going to place the top rack on top. I'm just adjusting to make sure that they're not literally on top of each other, so there's enough space for the smoke to cook the meat evenly. Now we're going to place the top rack here on the top of my smoker. We are going to spray the second rib rack with cooking spray just to give it the non-stick. We place it up on top of the grate. I make sure I go in a crisscross pattern. You'll see what I mean right now. So I lay the first rib onto my rack. And in each slot, you can put a rib in there, but it'll take a lot longer to cook. But I'm kind of giving them a space in between, like jumping every other slot. Then that way I have ample space for the smoke to really get into every nook and cranny on this rib. It cooks it a lot better, more efficient. It gets that more of the smokiness into the meat. Now this is what I mean. The bottom rack I left it vertical, and the top ones I left it horizontal. Because I really don't want too much of the drippings from the top to oversaturate the bottom one. So at least the grease, the renderings from the meat will actually not overtake the bottom rack as much. I'm using maple wood as my smoke that I'm going to add right now. I'm using Kingsford briquettes. Well, it looks good right now. Now I'm going to close up the smoker. I make sure to keep the top vent open, and I adjust the bottom ones to regulate the heat. I'm going to open up the smoker. I'm going to throw in some maple wood chunks. The smoke that you see right now is from the additional briquettes that I added prior to putting the middle part onto the smoker itself. Now remember, when you're adding wood chunks, the first 2 hours of the smoke is when the meat is going to absorb all that flavor of the wood. Any adding of the wood after the first 2 hours of the smoke is really not going to do anything to it. So I try to make sure within the first 2 hours, every half hour, I'm adding some wood chunks onto the smoker so we can give it the nice smoke ring onto the meat. Once the wood chunks are catching on fire, you're going to see a lot more smoke coming out from your smoker. Alright, it's already been 2 hours since we first placed the ribs onto the smoker. What I like to do, and each person is different, you can leave the ribs untouched as long as you're adding coals to your smoker until they're done. But this is what the ribs look like at the 2 hour mark for me. They're starting to get the nice darkened color. They look a lot more, starting to get a little bit more cooked, as you can tell. The ends, you can see the little charness to it. Now, what I like to do is I like to have a small portable table outside. And I'll set up 2 pieces of aluminum foil onto my table. I kind of split them halfway, and now I'm going to place the rib right in the middle of that. The reason I do this is it'll actually, when you foil the meat after 2 hours of smoke and put it back into the smoker, the meat will actually get a lot more tender in the long run, and it won't dry out as much if you were to leave it alone in the smoker for 4 to 6 hours. This helps break down the meat a lot more. Doesn't dry it out because it's cooking in its own juices. And if you cook it without the aluminum foil, which is another method, to each their own, each one has their own preference. There's no wrong way of doing this. When you do it the other way, with not foiling them for 6 hours, they'll be a lot more drier, a little bit, still tender. So this is what it looks like after I've foiled up all my ribs. And now I just close the lid and let them cook for the next 4 hours. And once I take them out after the 6 hour mark, or close to the 6 hour mark, I pull them off the smoker. I let them rest. The important key word here is let them rest for about, I let them rest for about 15 minutes. And as you can tell by me cutting into the ribs, you can see the bone, how it's very clean. It separates very well from the meat, and this is what you're looking for. Where when I open it up, you can still see steam coming out. This is from the natural juices that got released from the smoking process. And it'll be fall off the bone delicious. The reason I like the Memphis Dry Rub is for its simplicity. See how flexible and pliable that is? Oh man, I'm getting hungry just by looking at this. So I just get it and just separate each bone. I just find where the bone is and I start just cutting. The knife has to be sharp, but as you can tell, I'm not even cutting at this point, it's just falling apart. You can accompany this with any type of barbecue sauce. The barbecue sauce, I like to leave it as an option for people that love barbecue sauce, such as Chris and Pitts or Stubbs Barbecue. Those are my personal choices. Also, you can pair this up with a nice Pinot Noir or a Malbec. Again, those are my red wine choices for me. If you have any other type of wine, I would love to listen to it. But yeah, like I said, this is what it looks like after pushing about 6 hours in the smoker. They're nice and colored, fall off the bone goodness. Now, the best part is coming up, eating them. Well, this is pretty much how I do my ribs. Everybody has their own method, their own recipe. I will be linking the recipe below. And if you liked the video, hit the thumbs up. Thank you for stopping by.